All right, so I know it's hard to remember, but yesterday we were on this slide. Today is November 17. So the last we were getting towards the bottom, we had covered the difference between line maintenance and shop maintenance, and the fact that shop maintenance could also be called depot maintenance or heavy maintenance. We also covered the fact that we discussed in detail about using the correct maintenance manual, and in particular making sure that you were doing it correctly. So I want to go over one more thing about making sure you're doing it correctly. Can anybody tell me in FAR 43 what it say you're going to do some work on an aircraft as a certified mechanic? Actually, anybody who's going to do work, there are other people that can do aircraft. What does the FAA has to happen for you to be able to do work on an aircraft and sign it off? In addition to having to use the appropriate manual. Pardon me? Oh, yeah. Is anybody familiar with Federal Aviation Regulation Part 43? Okay, so go ahead, Elizabeth. Yeah. And so what does it specifically say? I'm a mechanic. I want to go do some work on an aircraft. What does it tell me? You don't have it memorized. But I know where to find it. So I'm on www.faa.gov. Let's see. Applicability, records, persons authorized. Just for fun, let's look at persons authorized. I know you can't read that back there, sorry. The holder of a mechanic certificate, the holder of a repairman certificate, a person working under the supervision of somebody, the holder of a repair station, an air carrier, except for ports pilot. That means private pilot and recreational pilots can do work. And let's see, pilots, preventive maintenance, and we don't care about the rest of preventative maintenance as pilots. So that's persons, content form, maintenance, preventative records. What do you do with life limited parts? Content form and disposition, maintenance records, performance rules. Performance rules. Let's see, I don't know how to, here we go. Guess I do. So each person performing maintenance, alteration, or preventative maintenance, that's us, we're going to do maintenance, on an aircraft, engine, propeller, or appliance shall use. The term shall use means it is mandatory. It doesn't mean you ought to or a really good idea. It means you will, you shall, without fail, mandatory, shall use methods, techniques, practices prescribed in the current, you notice it says the word current? I know it's still hard to read back there, but it says current manufacturer's maintenance manual or instructions for continued airworthiness, which is usually found in the maintenance manual prepared by the manufacturers, or it says or other methods, techniques, and practices acceptable to the administrator. And so accept is noted in 4316. And he, well, also means she, shall use tools, equipment, and test apparatus necessary to assure completion of the work with accepted industry practices. If special equipment is recommended, must use that equipment. So if you're reading the maintenance manual, it says we recommend you use this piece of equipment. The FAA right here says you have to use that piece of equipment. Holy mackerel. Let's see. And everybody, each person maintaining, that's us, we're going to do maintenance, shall do work in such a manner and use materials of such a quality that condition blah 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 will be at least as equal to its original or properly altered conditions. Okay, we're not going to go into that right here. And there's more stuff for inspections, airworthiness limitations. Question? All right. guess if I plugged in my device, it would work better. Just so happy it's Friday. Because my niece and nephew and my sister are coming over on Sunday, and we're having Thanksgiving on Sunday. Why won't it? Huh? Compared to yours? Do I have a big family? I don't think so. It's just going to be my mom, my sister's 3 kids, and me. Is that big? For some reason, my gizmo doesn't want to work. Let's see if I can get it to work here. That works. Alright, now it'll work. So, shall use manufacturer's maintenance manual. Yeah, thank you. Alright, so if we're going to do work on turbine engines, we're going to have to follow the maintenance manual. We're going to have to use the right tools and equipment. And of course, if you haven't noticed, getting foreign objects inside of a jet engine is generally a bad. I'm trying to think of a different word besides bad, because bad connotates evil, and evil connotates eternal suffering. Well, my thought is eternal damnation, but those are strong words. Although I am standing at a pulpit right now, so I guess I can say that. Well, that's probably true if I'm not the one who has to fix what went wrong. But maybe more importantly than that is that repairs I do incorrectly, for instance, because I didn't keep everything clean and I let things get into the engine, it's my responsibility for the deaths of all the people on that airplane that crashed because the engine failed and blew up and killed people. So I think I'm going to take that responsibility more as important than whether somebody else had to do more work. But hey, that's just me. All right, so one way to describe line maintenance is, I already said that, is that the engine's installed in the airframe. The engine's still in the aircraft. It may have to have some special tooling. But holy mackerel. FOD, that's going to be a test question almost for sure. What is FOD is a 3-letter abbreviation for what 3 words? Foreign object damage. And it's kind of used slightly improperly. You could argue that foreign object damage is what happens to the airframe or the engine. But for practical use, we use the term FOD as that piece of metal or rock or whatever it is, that, or a tool that gets into the engine or gets into the airframe. So we're kind of using it as what is the damage that occurs, but we're also using FOD as a term that means that piece of debris, that's that piece of something in the aircraft or the engine that's not supposed to be there. And so this one is really important. Account for all tools and equipment. When I was in the service, we had a giant box. We did 200-hour phase inspections on T-38s, or 2-seat pilot trainers. They barely go supersonic on a good day. And I did 200-hour phase inspections. Every 200 hours, they drag them into the hangar. We take them apart, inspect them, put them back, fix everything, put it back together again. And we had this big, giant toolbox. Literally, it was about 5 feet tall, and it was curved. And if straight, it was probably about 12 feet long, because it had 3 sides on it. They were about 4 feet. And it was all shadow box. That is where every tool was. Behind it was painted a different color, so you could open up the doors to one section of it, and you about 30 seconds to confirm whether all the tools were there. It was like white with black, or maybe it was black painted with white, I can't remember. So, tries to bring in your own tools in any way, shape, or form, because they didn't go in there and you might accidentally leave it in the aircraft. And that was the first thing you did when it was cleanup time. The very first thing we did was put all the tools away, and before sweeping the floor and throwing it in the trash. And the reason for that is because once we, in my shop, there's about 6 of us, we cleaned up and then went to make sure all the tools were put away. A socket was missing. And so since we had swept the floor and dumped the trash into the dumpster, one of us had to go dumpster to look for that socket. Huh? Yeah. But nobody wanted to go diving in the dumpster again. So what we decided that it would be much, much better if the very first thing we did when it was time to clean up was confirm that all our tools were put away. And then let's clean everything up, so if we throw something away, it's not one of our tools. So the vast majority of the places you're going to go to work, however, you're not going to be in the U.S. military, and you might even be working for a contractor that works for the U.S. military, but you're still going to need your own tools. So this is going to be very, very important for you to get into that habit pattern of not putting your tools on the engine, in the engine, on the aircraft, in the engine, because in the aircraft, because it's going to be far too easy for you to forget that one tool. So you're going to have to be much more careful, because everybody in here is going to set up tools like a shadow box so you can open every drawer and make sure all the tools are in there. I've not seen anybody do that religiously. So you're going to have to pay very, very close attention. And one great habit pattern is to not set your tools down in or on the aircraft if at all possible. So we're going to say that to help prevent FOD. Don't put your tools on or in the aircraft. I have seen people have a really good technique where they'll have, I actually just saw them, they'll have a rubber mat, and they'll have that on the aircraft, like on the wing or something, and they'll put their tools on it, but that's where all their tools are. So that way, when they take all the tools up off of that rubber mat, they know they have all of their tools. So I would highly recommend that you do something like that. Wow. Dun, 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 dun. There's some other good, so we're going to add that list to this list right here. We already talked about operational areas, loose clothing in particular. Loose clothing is a problem when the engine is running. Like if you like to wear baseball caps, you need to not be wearing baseball caps near an engine that's running, because if the wind knocks it off and gets sucked in the engine, somebody's going to find out where that baseball cap came from. Personal items. I love having pockets with pencils and pens, but when I go out to run engines, I take them out and I stick them inside of my pants pockets so they can't come out. Once or twice a year around the United States, somebody starts up a jet engine, and somebody left a piece of tool in there. They left a piece of safety wire. They left a nut, a bolt, or a rock got thrown in there, or bird died in there, or Fred was asleep taking a nap in there. Not Friedrich. That's a different Fred. Huh? What? So before you start an engine, you always want to take a look inside the intake. Obviously, if there's something left inside the exhaust duct, it's not good, but it's not nearly so bad, except, well, Fred probably won't die if he's back there, but he'll probably get 2nd or 3rd degree burns. But that's way better. Anybody ever been sucked up by a jet engine? Only once? Yeah, I did in the 1940s, but then I was reincarnated. And so this last technique down here is really, really good. If you see people that know what they're doing, obviously engines have to cool down, and so generally speaking, or something gets blown in the exhaust. Melt your plastic. Really bad to start the engine with the intake cover on. Yes. Yes, that's correct. So you'd be able to take it off and inspect the intake. Getting in there accidentally, in particular from the wind or small insects or animals. Although the insects wouldn't be that bad. I'd hate to find I don't know what would happen if a bird got sucked in it crawled inside of a jet. I don't think birds do that often, but I'm not an ornithologist. Is anybody in here an experienced ornithologist? You study birds? No? Yeah, but consume and spit out birds is that, and then still operate without flying apart into pieces. That doesn't mean that it won't cause damage needing repair. It also doesn't mean that it won't cause damage that they'll have to shut the engine down. It also doesn't mean that it won't cause damage that the engine will run so badly right after engine start that then something will be wrong that they'll have to shut the engine down and cancel the flight. If you talk about bird ingestion on jet engines, yes, they do a lot of testing, but their testing is based on the aircraft is in flight, and will the engine break up so badly that you'll have an uncontained failure. An uncontained turbine engine failure is where parts inside the engine break through the engine case and go flying out of the engine. And it's that uncontained engine failure that's the bad thing if you're in flight. If the engine quits, even if it's a single engine, you're just a very heavy glider, and you still have a good shot at everyone on the aircraft surviving. If you're in a twin-engine jet airplane, you have a really good shot of everything being fine, as long as that engine doesn't come flying apart and damage other parts of the engine. I don't remember what class it was this semester, so I'll tell you the story. So I used to teach a class, jet engines for pilots, and back then the 777 had just come out about 15 years ago. The Boeing 777, but it's got humongous engines on it. I think the latest version of this 1,000 pounds of thrust per engine. Has anybody ever heard of this Boeing 777? Okay, one person has. You got to understand, when the Boeing 747 came out, the first one went into service with Pan Am Airlines in 1969. The original 747. Let's find a nice picture. That one's pretty good. The original Boeing 747. Each engine, it was a Pratt Whitney PT6, each engine had 140,000 pounds, had 40,000 pounds of thrust. So 40 times 4 is 160,000 pounds of thrust. So I want you to think about that for a minute. In 1969, when the first 747 went into service with Pan Am, it had 4 engines at 40,000 pounds of thrust, and 4 engines times 40,000 is 160,000 pounds, 160,000 pounds. When the original 777 came out, each engine, the original is a nice classic picture. Here we go. The original Boeing 777 had 90,000 pounds of thrust each engine. 90 times 2 is 180. So the very first 777 had 180,000 pounds of thrust, compared to the first Boeing 747 had only 140,000. So which of these two airplanes, when they were each brand new, you think could carry more cargo and passengers and fuel? The one that put out, 50,000 pounds more thrust? 30, 180 instead of 140, 40,000 pounds more thrust. Okay, now granted, 747s have gotten bigger and the engines have gotten bigger. But an early 777 was bigger than an old 747. So think about how big that is. And so now the engines are past 100,000 pounds of thrust. So notice in my class I mentioned something, and one of my students said, well, my dad flies 777s. And I said, sweet, ask your dad the following question. Taking off out of sea level at Los Angeles International Airport is 11 feet above sea level, effectively at sea level. On a standard day, which is 59 degrees Fahrenheit, and the altimeter setting is 29.92, it's 14.73 pounds per square inch. On a standard day, a normal average day at sea level, if you're in a Boeing 777 and it takes off the ground and you put the landing gear up and you put the flaps up and one engine fails completely, zero thrust, like you hit a bird, shut the engine off. It's not idling and putting out a few thousand pounds of thrust. It's shut off. And you go on the good engine to maximum continuous power. That's not takeoff power, because takeoff power is a little higher. On the good engine, you'd be at climb power. You'd actually have to push the throttle forward to get to maximum continuous. Maximum continuous means you can run it all day long. There's no time limit on how long you can run it that way. Typically, takeoff power, how long can you run engines at takeoff power? Generally speaking, because generally speaking, takeoff power in jet engines is limited to 5 minutes. And that's where you normally take off power, you get off the ground, you put the gear up, you put the flaps up, and you pull the throttle back, you go less than maximum continuous, and you pull it back down to climb power setting, which is a little more than cruise, but it's not max continuous, and it's certainly not takeoff power. You just got to move those throttles back with the first takeoff roll. Takes 30 seconds or a minute, and it takes 30 seconds or a minute after you get off the ground to put the landing gear and the flaps up. So usually the engines are only at takeoff power for 2 minutes, maybe a little less. All right, so you get off the ground in your 777 at Los Angeles International. Oh, wait, and the airplane is at maximum gross weight. The airplane is at its legal maximum weight. So the thing weighs, literally, it's like 600,000 pounds. That's like 250 Honda Civics. Something like that. In any case, you get off the ground, the gear comes up, the flap comes up, you've already pulled the power lever back to climb power, and you get something happens with that engine, all the lights come on, fire, handle, and the engine shuts down. The question was, how fast will that airplane climb if you're at sea level? Your engine can produce a lot of power, and it's good because your wings can generate a lot of lift. How fast can that airplane climb when one engine is completely dead? Before I tell you that answer, if anybody should ever seen white and red Cessna 152 out there in the corner, it's the most closest to airworthy airplane we have. And you go to takeoff power with the airplane, takeoff power is maximum continuous power, is also climb power, and quite frankly, if you get above 3,000 or 4,000 feet, you're just going to leave it all the way forward, and that's going to be cruise power, but that's a whole other story. Especially if you're renting it. If you're renting it, you just push it all the way forward and you tighten the throttle down, and just before you land, you pull the throttle back because you're renting. But that's another story. That airplane at gross weight at takeoff power will climb at about 500 feet per minute. If everything's working perfectly, the engine's producing its 100 horsepower, it's at sea level, and you're at takeoff, and you're at and you do everything correctly. So if you're used to flying little tiny airplanes, if you get this Cessna 210 out here, the white one with red trim that the propeller's off of, loaded it to gross weight, loaded it to the maximum allowable takeoff weight, and you took off out of sea level. And I haven't that thing to. Okay, sweet. All right, if you ran that thing takeoff power and got it off the ground and put the plane and left it at, if one engine quit, I guess if you just left it at takeoff power, it would probably 1,000 feet per minute. Actually, so back to this Boeing 777. Remember, the thing weighs 600,000 pounds, and you got 90,000 pounds of thrust on either side, and one engine quits. According to the student, according to him telling me about his parent who flies him, that airplane will still climb at 1,000 feet per minute. Oh, at sea level, it's 5 or 6 or 7,000 feet per minute. It probably doesn't take 2 minutes to get to 10,000 feet. It's not a rocket, but it's still a pretty big ride, even if you're not sitting in the front. Question? To get to 10,000 feet? Yeah, on a hot day, you might not even get to 10,000 feet. Yeah. So I don't know why I got distracted and wanted to talk about Boeing 777s. I haven't read up on Boeing 787s. I have some familiarity with 777s. All right, so if I was to see, so if we're going to prevent FOD, whoops. Right, there we go. So we're going to place covers on inlets and exhausts to prevent birds from getting in there. We as mechanics can't really do too much about stopping birds from hitting the aircraft in flight. We'll talk more about this one when we get to engine operation. Obviously, we're going to inspect the inlets and exhaust. And secure personal items. And this is going to be during an engine run. This is going to be an issue during engine run. Since most, if not everybody in here has done some work on a PT6.
Hey everyone, it's Paul Bertorelli reporting for AvWeb and Aviation Consumer. You know, one of the cool things about turbine engines is that everything's spinning in the same direction, so they're smoother and a lot more durable than piston engines where everything's going back and forth and pistons are slapping around at a mile a minute. But that doesn't mean that turbine engines like this PT6 here don't need to be overhauled. They do, because certain things wear out. I've come here to United Turbine near Miami to see how PT6s are overhauled. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about how a PT6 works. Now, PT6 is made by Pratt Whitney Canada. This is a PT6-114, which is a caravan engine. And by jet standards, a PT6 is kind of backwards in that the air, instead of flowing from front to back, flows from back to front. This is the front of the engine where the propeller is. And if you look on a typical turbine aircraft, the inlet will be down here at the bottom. The air flows backward up into the compressor section. Now there are 3 compressor wheels in there, 3 axial and 1 centrifugal. And from there, the compressed air is fed into the burner unit, or what we call the hot section. The fuel is introduced, and that produces hot gas that is directed at the power turbine. And the power turbine is connected directly to gearbox assembly. This particular model, and most PT6s, have a 2-stage gearbox reduction to get it down to prop RPM. The PT6 is a free turbine engine, which means that there's no direct mechanical connection between what's called the gas generator and the power section. There's a space in there, not like a turbo shaft where everything is connected. So that's the basics of how a PT6 works. Now we're going to take a look at how they're overhauled.
The first step is receive the engine from the customer, put it on an engine disassembly stand, and take it to disassembly. The engine gets disassembled to every nut, every bolt, every washer, every gasket, everything comes apart. After disassembly, the engine goes through a cleaning process, which is made up of mineral spirits cleaning, stripping with an acid stripper, degreasing, and then once the engine is clean, it goes to NDT. NDT is basically a crack inspection. We do mag particle inspection and liquid penetrant. Once it's completed that, it goes through dimensional inspection per overhaul manual. In inspection, we go through the overhaul manual to check what they ask us to check as far as dimensions, if it comes out cracked in NDT, if that crack can be repaired. If we look for any scoring that can be fixed or not be fixed. And our ultimate goal is to see what we can put back in the engine, what can be repaired, and what can be replaced, or what needs to be replaced. Well, all O-rings get replaced. There's some models that have different things that require certain items to be replaced. For example, this one requires a new prop shaft, new sun gear, new gear set. That varies across different engine models, but the biggest one is probably the sun gear and the gear set, the first stage. After inspection, we give the cost estimate to the customer. Once they approve it, those parts that we can repair in-house go in-house and get repaired in our machine shop or paint shop or other rework areas we have here. Whatever we cannot do, like welding, we send that out. Any coating we can do for the housings in-house. Any coating for the compressor or high-performance coating goes to an outside vendor. Once all those parts come back, we issue what we have from stock and buy what we don't have out on the open market, and we bring all those engines to an engine stand. Once the mechanic has all his parts, he can go ahead with assembly. All the main rotors get balanced in our balance room here, and once everything's balanced, we can finish assembly, and once assembly is finished, we go to test up. If a mechanic has all his parts, he can assemble an engine for a regular 8-hour shift in about 5 days. Testing process takes an hour to 2 hours. We verify their performance of the engine based on overhaul limits as far as temperature and speed. We also check for vibration, make sure that that's within overhaul limits, both in the accessory gearbox and throughout the compressor and the reduction gearbox. And once we confirm that all those numbers are correct, the engine has passed test. It goes through final assembly, which is mostly safety wire and additional items added that are not needed for test. Once that's done, it goes to final inspection, and the chief inspector goes through the engine, makes sure all the paperwork is up to date, everything was done correctly, and he's the one that signs off the engine, issues an 8130 and 337 form, and then it's ready to ship back to the customer.
So there's 27 different jobs in there that you could have. Or you stand in front of a camera and you're nervous and you don't know whether to look at the camera or to look at the interviewer. And you wear that little white necklace thing that he had on there. I got to get one of those. That's what I'm hoping for. Quick, what airplane is that? A what? Look at the windshield and see if you can tell if it's a Boeing windshield or an Airbus windshield. Yeah, I think it's a Boeing. Yeah, I think it's a 777. Yeah,
very easy to make.
So you know, they didn't reinstall it on the same airframe. Alright, I gotta show you this one before we go. There's way too much. Is this turbine engine related? That's too bad. All they did was put a jet engine in the back of the car. They didn't replace it. Look, that's a Rolls-Royce C250. Right there. You can see the air duct coming back. Here's the combustion section, and then the air turns and goes into the turbines, and it's got two exhausts coming up. Intake.
420 horsepower, gobs of torque. It fills all its horsepower and torque at about 2,000 RPM.
I don't know, maybe it does run.
Extremely fast.
This is a throttle system for the helicopter engine.
Because of the sound, it's probably illegal in every state in the United States because of how much sound it would put out. Probably. So if you just